first book comes out and it becomes a bestseller, even though nobody knows who I am. Like the great distraction. We used to think that movies or TV are kind of our competition, but the real competition for anything creative is what's on our phones. Figuring out when an idea was good enough to take you all the way to the end.
Art Pod.
Arthur Slade, welcome to the Art Pod.
Thanks, it's good to be here.
Yeah, so you grew up on a ranch in the Cypress Hills of Saskatchewan. How do you think that affected sort of your imagination as a young person interested in writing?
It's curious because of course it's a ranch, and there's like the nearest people are like 3 or 4 miles away, right? And I had 3 brothers, and of course my mom and dad. But you spent a lot of time alone, and as a kid, I spent a lot of time kind of wandering around the hills and looking up at the stars and that sort of thing. But also a lot of time reading. So I think it really, I guess in one sense, it got me used to the loneliness of being a creative person.
Right.
You're all alone. But I also think it kind of inspired me in a sense of how big the world is. Like you could just see such a far distance. And so because I write fantasy and science fiction, those sorts of things, it felt like there's all these different worlds out there, even though I'm in very much the back end of the world. It still made me feel like there was there are all these rich potentials or potentialities around me that I could write about, create eventually.
Yeah, maybe there's something with the landscape itself here in Saskatchewan that it is infinite, and it does this strange thing when you look out into this infinite landscape. It's like you said, it's the potential. So with that comes just this imagination, you can kind of there's no limits in a way because it's like a blank canvas in all directions in a strange way.
Endless. And I think it's it really, because you can see so far and you can see such a great distance, I think for me, it helps my imagination in going, oh, I can think or dream just as far as I can see.
Yeah.
And I'm sure people living in mountains go, oh, I have kind of a similar, experience with mountains. But there is just something about being able to, you're still on Earth, but when it's night, and of course, there's no lights only a few lights in our ranch. And you can see the stars are just shining everywhere. It's something I don't, because I live in the city now, I don't see anymore. But you just feel so much more connected to that whole universe. So I think at a basic level, your landscape does affect what you do.
Yeah. There's something about that because as a kid, you're kind of like, myself anyway, I grew up on an acreage, middle of nowhere. You go out for a walk, it's just wide open fields into nothingness. But I was obsessed with like Conan and fantasy stuff and castles and these scenes that are the complete opposite of where I grew up. It's like these scenes that are more like European Alps and this kind of stuff, but it's the total opposite of the landscape that I'm actually in, which resembles something more like Dune. It's this like just a vast,
it's
empty,
bit more green,
just a vast, empty grassland. And but there's still something about, maybe there's a meditative quality that can kick in with that sort of infinite thing with your imagination, because it does tap into that sort of potential thing. And you could daydream easier because you have almost zero influence coming in.
Yeah.
Because
you can
just nature.
Fill up that space, right, with what you dream about. I think, and of course, I grew up in a valley, so I got kind of the best of both worlds in that sense. So I could almost imagine the hobbits walking around, in a valley, that sort of thing.
Right.
But it reminds me a little bit of how people from the prairies tend to make, good sailors, because they're used to looking across that vast distance. And maybe, and again, I don't want to get too artsy. But maybe there is that whole kind of, the way it affects your brain is you're able to not just look at the ocean, but you're able to look out at that world and create things because you're so used to being able to fill it, with your mind. So that was as artsy as I get.
No, that's great. That's Yeah, because I think about this a lot. I think about why, you know, yeah, say growing up in the prairies like that, in the extreme isolation, how you can have some people who pop out of that actually are just extremely creative. And just
Mhm.
what is it that kind of triggers this thing? Where does it come from? And I think a lot of that thing of just allowing yourself to be bored and
Yeah.
not distracted and kind of having those moments of isolation and quiet as a kid where you can sort of doze off into the like the hobbits. You can go hang out with Tolkien and this kind of thing, and you can
Yeah.
really get immersed in that and daydream in that space. Do you So as far as the stuff that you grew up with, was Tolkien a big deal as a kid?
Yeah. Well, the when I was in grade 4, we had a really wonderful teacher who unfortunately only lasted a year, Mr. Fitzgerald, because he taught us Dungeons and Dragons instead of math. So
Oh,
that might have affected his
oh, that's
employment.
awesome.
Uh,
That guy sounds
but
great.
it was because
That's
that
awesome.
was like, oh, you can do this, you can, this, and this is of course in the 70s, right? So only college people knew about Dungeons and Dragons.
Right.
And he read The Hobbit to us. And I can still
Oh,
remember
cool.
just being completely enchanted. This was like the most amazing thing. So I think that really affected me in terms of what I was going to write and how I want. Not that I wrote a lot. I write more fantasy now than kind of, I was going to say the later part of my career. Um, but it's just the whole idea of having an imagination that I'm so thankful that we had that one year of this all these amazing ideas coming from this teacher, not knowing that he's just teaching, I guess. I mean, he's
Right.
sure he was more than just teaching, but just that is going to kind of set this little spark, and it's like, yeah, I can. I love reading this stuff. I love hearing this stuff. I think I can create this stuff. And Dungeons and Dragons is basically telling a novel, except
Yeah.
rolling dice and stuff and yelling at each other in between.
Yeah. And there's kind of a heavy metal feel to it too. I always thought that like D&D, like when I got interested into it, like when I, as a kid, it felt like there was a crossover with D&D and even like the music that I was listening to. It felt like that
Yeah.
it's like when you're a heavy metal guy, like,
Yeah.
when you take Iron Maiden and D&D and you make that Venn diagram, like that crosses over. Like there's kind of
Oh,
there's
yeah.
a, there's
Yeah.
something in
Well,
there.
when they come out with Rime of the Ancient Mariner and
Right.
Dune, I remember I was
Uh,
in like grade 11 or 12 whenever that Piece of Mind album came out. And I saw they have actually read the same book as me and
right.
they're writing a song about it. This is like the most amazing thing. And here I am in
Yeah.
Saskatchewan and I'm experiencing all this. And so, and of course, for most people, they're just like, well, what's that? But
Yeah.
to me, it was just, oh, these books have affected other people, not just me. I'm not the only one who's read them.
And it's like a secret code. It's like you're in a club. You're part of a group of people who have a secret handshake between these things that you enjoy, and you're kind of
That's right.
part of this group that it's sort of, flying under the radar for other people, that you're enjoying this stuff that's kind of on a different
Yeah.
level in a sense. Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
And there's kind of an acceptance there too, right? Like if your rock gods are reading the same stuff, then it's not
Yeah.
that bad. It's an okay thing.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. You're somehow, even though you're a nerd, you're somehow now like with the cool kids. You're
Yeah.
secretly actually part of the cool kid club,
Yeah. Yeah.
because
The
yeah.
cool satanic kid club.
Right.
But
Yeah. Hail Satan. Yeah. You're in with those guys. Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
yeah.
So can you listen to music when you're writing?
Oh, I do. Yeah.
Really?
That kind of, the bizarre thing is, and I do listen to, I still listen to Iron Maiden and Judas Priest, of course. Well, they're
Yeah.
still putting albums out, so they're doing well into their 70s. But what I do is I crank it up or have my headphones on because I don't want to bother my kid or my wife, and it blocks out the rest of the world. And I tend to,
Oh,
if I
okay.
put on something, it eventually just goes into the background, and it becomes kind of a background noise. I mean, you
Right.
can hear the chugging and all that stuff, but it allows me to go to that other place,
I see.
and
Okay.
I know for most people it's kind of distracting to have lyrics. They like to
Well, the
hear
lyrics. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, but it just goes into the background, and it's just like,
Huh.
oh yeah, these are the people who write the cool songs. Now I'm going to try and write something cool.
Right. Do you change the music depending on the genre that you're writing in?
I do. Like I wrote a book that was set in World War One, and I actually downloaded like every song I could from World War One, so it was playing in the background all the time, and I think it really helped me kind of get the idea of the characters and how people were thinking back then.
Right.
And right now, I'm working on an actual heavy metal D&D lit RPG book
Yeah.
that is
Right on.
just the longest thing I've ever done. And yeah, all I've done, because this one is set in kind of or it's inspired by 80s heavy metal. That's
Cool.
all I listen to while I'm writing it, and it helps inspire scenes. I try not to steal lyrics right out because that's illegal. But
Right.
but the mood, right, of all
Yeah.
the churning, kind of angry and yet fantasy oriented 80s music was just so much fun.
It sort of heightens the sandbox. It's like
Yeah.
it's like dumping a bunch of toys into the sandbox to play with that you can kind of like pick up and fiddle with, you
Yeah.
know, with
Yeah,
with the music.
absolutely.
Yeah.
And I would, when I was writing my series about a shape changer, the Hunchback Assignments,
Yeah.
or Mission
Yeah.
Clockwork, has all these different names. Then I was trying to find spy music because he's part spy, right? And just
Right.
having that in the background just reminded me of what I was writing, even though it kind of disappears back there. So yeah, music has been very inspirational for me.
Yeah, man. Yeah, it's project related because I too I find that some music I haven't listened to in a while because I haven't returned to that project. I've got kind of like, something on the back burner, but it's like, well, that project has a playlist, and when I'm doing that, it comes with that music in a way. And but yeah, with the genres, it's one of those things like you've crossed over to a lot of genres. Like Dust was, I guess, I always think that Dust is something kind of like a Clive Barker, Stephen King sort of, like, it's a type of horror,
Yeah.
in a way. I would say it's kind of a horror type thing. The Moto series, Hunchback Assignments, is in the steampunk kind of realm, and then you've got Dragon Assassin, which is full on fantasy. So yeah, it's kind of all over the place. And also you've got the vampire books. So
yeah.
you've written in a ton of different genres. Is there any? I mean, I understand why, because you want to play, in the different sandboxes. But is there any one in particular that you feel the most comfortable with? Is there one that that you always want to come back to? Because like deep down, you're actually that kind of kid, at the end of the day.
It's funny because when I was growing up, it was like reading Stephen King but of course, reading all the fantasy novels and reading science fiction, Robert Heinlein, and those things. And so I don't know that there's one that I feel completely is mine. Anytime I'm in one of them, I feel like I'm that part of me when I was a kid who was reading all those, those types of books. So when I was writing Dust, it was very much kind of an allegory to Ray Bradbury and to Stephen King and to also Saskatchewan history, because I kind of think of it as like a history, horror novel. And so, but now that I'm, writing kind of really just epic fantasy, that feels like now, because I'm writing it, it's like, oh, this is exactly who I am. And when I switch the next one, it'll be, oh, this is who I was writing historical World War One novel. Oh, I know everything about World War One. And I think right now, fantasy probably feels the most comfortable for me, and maybe it's just where I am in life. I don't know. It's what I've read probably the most of everything. But yeah, I just kind of jump around to whatever the idea is, and follow it. Fantasy, though, I have to say I'm having so much joy with it, partly because you don't really have to do a lot of research. It's really the whole, especially the Dragon Assassin novels. To me, it was, I just want to write a book that you just drop into and you race, and then you're at the end and you go, oh, most people survived. That was fun.
Yeah.
And that's what I love about fantasy.
This episode is brought to you by the things that we make.
Silverwing.
Shade is a young silverwing bat, the runt of his colony, but he's determined to prove himself on the long, dangerous winter migration to Hibernaculum, millions of wingbeats to the south. During a fierce storm, he loses the others and soon faces the most incredible journey of his young life. perfect for young readers who are into Amulet, Bone, Wings of Fire, or graduating from Dogman. Silverwing is the first book in this best-selling series and is available at bookstores everywhere, or you can find the link in the show notes.
Silverwing.
Yeah, I mean, like say with Dust and with Baguetto's Shadow, you're dealing with history, and so you have to tread not lightly, but you have to tread carefully over that because you're dealing with this. You want to be respectful of the time and all this kind of stuff, and you have to be a little careful. You can't just like wing it necessarily.
No.
And whereas with fantasy, you kind of just maybe do whatever suits the work itself and what's best for the work. And sometimes maybe in your research, you have to leave behind things that might actually be best for the story, but you got to kind of sacrifice it to historically what's going on, this kind of thing.
That's right. I think that the kind of pressure as an artist that you have when you're writing something that has a historical, its underpinnings. So Dust is very 1930s, I have to make sure it feels like 1930s, that the songs that they're listening to, the books they're reading, everything because the moment you make a mistake, people go, I don't believe it. I don't believe the rest of it. Right.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like I forget which author it was, and I hope they're not listening to this. But there was it was like some kind of ghost story, and there's these kids racing down a road, and they're listening to AC/DC, and I think it was Thunderstruck or something like that. And the year was, man, I forget what year they said, but I knew when I read it, because I was an AC/DC fan, that song didn't come out until 5 years after that. And I was immediately, I'm going, oh, well, if you're not even doing that simple research, then don't really trust. I assume I read the rest of the story. I don't remember. But that's the thing. That's the thing about having a historical element is you have that pressure. And with fantasy, you just have to have them. It's not necessarily easier because I'm not doing research, but I'm making things up and then I have to keep track of them, especially when you get into your fifth novel. You go, oh, is that guy dead yet? Or, but there's something, they're learning it as I'm learning it when I'm making a fantasy novel, whereas I have to learn it all first with a historical novel and then kind of squeeze it into the story without boring people so that they feel like they're in that place.
Right. And you can take, like say in Dragon Assassin, you can take things from our reality and place them in there, but you can play with them and you can flip them upside down. And as long as the reader buys into that reality that you've created for them, you can kind of have the best of both worlds, because you can take our contemporary world and flip it upside down, play with elements of it, and just sort of do whatever you want, as long as you maintain sort of the structure of the universe that you're building and the world that you've built. Yeah,
that's
how
right.
How do you go about world building? Like say with Dragon Assassin, how did you go about? Because you have to sit back at some point, like in D&D, like building a campaign. You have to sit back and zoom out in a way, right? And sort of look at like, well, I'm creating this universe that these people are going to inhabit. I mean, I'm guessing it's all about the characters and their arcs and their stories and what they're going through and them going from A to B. But they still have to inhabit a space, and that space has to feel believable and have rules. So how do you approach making that?
It's funny because, excuse me, Crimson, which was the first fantasy novel, excuse me, I'll stop coughing soon.
That's all right.
The first fantasy novel I'd written, with that one, I really planned everything out front. So I created the world. I had written out kind of the history of it, and kind of like you're saying about doing a D&D campaign. I had all of that, and then I started the novel. So in some ways, I was doing my research and then writing the novel. And I felt when I got to Dragon Assassin, I felt that previous, which worked really well for Crimson, I think, but it was just laborious. It was just I wanted to go back to just having fun. And so it really, with Dragon Assassin, when I was writing it, I just had like the idea, kind of a silly idea in the sense of going, oh, what's the worst thing I can think of? Well, an assassin riding on a dragon, that sounds scary. So, how does that all work together? And And I really just started writing right away and discovering it as I went along. And then, so that by the time I got to the end, most of it still held together, and you just have to go back and and put a few things here and there to make sure it actually makes sense.
Right.
And for that book, I think, and that series, I think it was the right process, because you're just giving people the basic information to paint the picture around the story, so that the story's just moving forward and the characters, are moving around in the story. And I feel like the world is well developed, but like I said previously, they're learning it with me, and that I that isn't always going to work for me. I could try that again with another novel, and it would just be, oh no, I really have to plan this out.
Yeah.
But that there's something I wanted to make Dragon Assassin familiar enough that people go, oh, I kind of know these are kind of like Norse, Norse or Vikings, and these are kind of like this, and so that you get this kind of feeling that it's like your world, but just as an echo of it. And then the important thing is the story.
Right. So how many books in total are there for Dragon Assassin?
There are 5 books for the original series, and which are all from Carmen the Assassin's point of view.
Yeah.
And then there's a new one that just came out. I was actually just listening to the audiobook, which comes out in a couple of
Ibrax?
weeks. And Ibrax is like a continuation after that series is done, but it's from the dragon's point of view. And it's just, he's the, I don't know if I've made a better character, because he's just so sarcastic, and he's like Smog and all these other dragons all kind of stuck together and just, I hate humans, and why is this one stuck on my back? And okay, I'll go kill some more people. And so it was really quite a bit of fun to go back to that world, but do it from his point of view.
Yeah, it's a different kind of perspective, and that's a fun challenge too. Actually, like flipping it around where you're inhabiting something that's like actually non-human, and you're writing from a perspective of something that's so alien that it opens up a whole different kind of
just how you reference things, just how many wing beats is it, those kind of things. Well, that's probably more from Silverwing than but
they're just bigger.
Does he have talons? Does he have that's right.
Yeah.
And does he have talons? Does he have claws? How does he reference? Everything's referenced from a dragon's point of view, as opposed to humans. And that he has this huge intellect and has read all the human works, which he kind of thinks are below him, but he'll read them anyway. And so it's just curious. I don't know that I've written from someone who isn't human before, and so that he's a vampire, but that was kind of another fun little challenge. And yet it's just, his sarcasm is very, very human. So that was easier to write.
Yeah. When you were talking about the sort of the plotting and sort of doing this thing where you're going to sort of go along with the reader on the adventure and discover it along the way, in a sense, maybe that's why the pacing is really good. It reads like, with Dragon Assassin, it reads really quickly. It's a really fast read. Mm-hmm. It has like a ba-dum. Even the chapter lengths are like, it's these bursts of energy where it's like boom, 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 boom. And it just flows really, really nice. And it creates like a really, like a high energy galloping sort of feel to it, which I think is really cool. And that's, it has a fast paced. It legit is fast paced. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's part of giving just enough of the world to paint the picture around the story, and not, I didn't get into long Tolkien-esque descriptions, which are wonderful, of the trees and that sort of thing. But those really just, those slow you down, especially if you're a younger reader. Although, I mean, that series is so strange to me, because it came out with Scholastic and they were saying, oh, it's for 10 and up. And then when I also self-published it on Amazon, and the people who were buying it were 40, 50, 60, 70 years old. And it's just like, man, that's who was reading it. And, out of all the copies it sold, probably 95% of them are actually people who are, over 50. And so,
well, we should say, go ahead. Sorry, I cut you off.
Oh, I was just gonna say, I clearly don't know my audience at all. Other than I'm glad they buy things.
Or you just discovered that there's actually an audience of dragon ladies that are obsessed with just all things dragons. Well, look at that one book. It's I'm going to screw the name up. It's not Wings of Fire because that's the graphic novel thing. It's the
Yeah.
latest one is Onyx something. There's 3
Yes.
books. Rebecca Yaros, I believe her name
Yeah,
is.
you're right. And the latest one just came out. I know that because I was doing a promotion for my books, and it came out at the same time, and it really decimated my promotion. But anyway,
we're missing a really good opportunity right now to just say the names of these books over and over again to help the algorithm.
That's right.
That way, anyone searching for that might find this, and then find a much superior fantasy dragon series called Dragon Assassin. Much better.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's a funny thing. It's like you think you know your audience, but do you really? Like, and that's kind of an interesting discovery, because it's like, well, no, it's actually this other demographic that you might not have thought about, and
I guess the other thing is too, another demographic that my publishers wouldn't have been able to reach, because they're the publisher who is like Scholastic in Canada is publishing it so that people in grade 5, 6, 7, 8 will be buying it. And I'm, of course, putting it on Amazon, and it's on Kindle, and most people have Kindles are older, and they all subscribe to Kindle, so they you're just going to get an older audience. And so it was just I'm glad that the story is interesting enough and fast enough that they still find it entertaining. And you're right, it's a really, even though it's sold to hundreds of thousands of copies, it's a really niche audience who just love reading about dragon riders. They read Anne McCaffrey when they were younger, and they're still, and they're finding this whole, and there's tons of books, similar to dragon, or at least other dragon rider books. Yeah. And so they have this whole kind of ocean that they can just swim in. And, when I was growing up, you'd read everything, but they have this niche, and it's wonderful that they do.
You might need to do, after the iBrack series, after that, you might need to do a slightly more adult version, because I also think that one of the things that demographic quite enjoys is a little bit of smut. They want a little bit of dragon smut. So, that might be a departure, but hey, you've done a lot of genres. I think that a little bit of dragon smut, I think you could pull it off. It would definitely be interesting.
You joke about that, but
I'm not joking at all. No,
I know. But in the sense that shortly after my Dragon Assassin came out, there was another book called Dragon Assassin that was, because this kind of happened. The Dragon Assassin started to become popular, and maybe the other book they developed at the same time.
Oh, okay.
Anyway, it had a similar name, but Dragon Assassin was a smutty.
Well,
under the same title, right? It's just like, and to be honest, the reason people, like older people are reading this book is because they don't want something that's got huge amounts of violence in it. They don't want something with sex. They're kind of a Christian, not that this is a Christian-based novel, but something that's a little bit cleaner. That's what they want. So they know they're not going to get anything that is not challenging, because there's certainly lots of violence. Yeah. But they kind of know what they're going to get, right? From this. And so that was also part of the audience. Not only do they like Dragon Rider stuff, but they like it to be clean in quotation marks.
This episode is brought to you by the things that we make. She's an assassin. He's a dragon. Together they'll take on an empire. Take a ride on a non-stop way adventure. Dragon Assassin, a thrilling fantasy series from award-winning author Arthur Slade. Links in show notes.
Yeah, and I think that there's something in that too, because when, say, with the Rebecca Yaros books, there is sort of that thing where people treat it almost like a guilty pleasure, like they know it's not very good, but they kind of get a kick out of that side of it, and that's kind of that'd be a awkward place to be in as a writer, where it's like people are reading, when people use the words like guilty pleasure when referring to your work.
Yeah, I know it's got to be frustrating.
It has to be a little frustrating, especially. I mean, I'm sure there's a level. Like my wife's been reading them. She's actually on the 3rd book, and she likes it. She's like, hey, yeah, it's fun. What can I say?
So I, th- I I think when I started writing, I was probably more literary, and now I'm more audience kind of in tune, I guess, or more appreciative that there are just novels out there that I could never read that just aren't interesting to me,
Right.
but they find their audience, and that's a good thing. Like because otherwise,
Yeah.
what those people going to read? And so uh, I have lots of respect for writers who can find their audience. It could be hard if you're kind of trapped in it and you want to do something different because that audience won't follow you. And that's one of the difficulties of being in kind of a niche. If I and it's a good if my career is a good example of don't do what I do. Dragon Assassin is probably my most popular book. But if I go and look at my sales of even my other fantasy novel, Crimson, it didn't go up even though Dragon Assassin sold crazy amounts.
Yeah.
And my Hunchback assignments didn't go up. There'll be a few people who will go from one to the other, but most of them are just reading it because they like that genre and they like the Dragon Rider. They don't want anything else. They look at the other book and they go, "Oh, there's no dragon on the cover. I'm not going to read it." And that's fine. That's you should be reading what you enjoy. But as an artist, it's like, oh, if this was my only source of income, I would have to just keep writing the same thing over and over again. And
It's
that
like a
might
band.
not be as entertaining.
It's like a band switching the type of music that they do.
That's right.
Like the people that are digging Silverwing and that series, they're not going to be interested in the other stuff that I'll do after. They're not interested.
Yeah.
There's gonna be no crossover there whatsoever. So they're each their own entity, which is kind of interesting because it's like you as the creator of these things, you don't really matter at the end of the day. You're just producing this thing and putting it in front of people. But beyond that, they care about the thing. You and like the person and what else they're doing, largely irrelevant for the most part.
Yeah, most of the people who have read Dragon Assassin again as an example don't know who I am. Like they don't remember the author's name; they just remember the cover and the title. And I think that comes as an example where it became really clear to me is in one of the of course I do look at reviews, but one of the Amazon reviews somebody said, "Oh, I really like all the books that she writes," and I'm going, "Oh, I just didn't even realize my sex." It's just like
sure, I'll take it.
I'm not even part of all this. It's just like the novel's all that matters, right? And that's fine. I'm lucky to have stumbled into it, and plus I really have loved what I've been creating. Like in the sense of as an artist, even though these are much simpler tales of what I was writing when I was younger.
Right.
I still just feel that it's that joy of the Hobbit, of being in that other place, and that's why I have now 6 novels in that world, and that's as long as the Lord of the Rings. So
there you go.
I actually added up the words and go, oh, I just went past the Lord of the Rings. That's a lot of words.
There you go. Yeah, awesome. Yeah, I wonder if the whole thing about I wonder if that's a cultural thing, if that's just changed over time. I remember, it's sort of like the death of collecting. I feel like younger people or people in general now don't collect things as much as they used to, like whatever that is, the hobby of collecting something. And I wonder if, say, when you find a writer that you really like, you would find out all their stuff, you'd get all their stuff, you'd read all their stuff. And I wonder if now people just consume things differently. If they don't do that anymore, they sort of, they like what they like and then they're onto something else. And they're not really along the ride for what else that artist makes. They're not really around for they don't really care about the journey of the creator. It's like, I think about comic people back in the day that I'd get all excited about. I'd want to find everything that they did. And I would follow books based on who's writing it and who's drawing it. Like that's what would sell me on that work, is who's behind it. But maybe that's different now. Like maybe the behavior, the consumption behaviors have just changed.
I think you're right. I mean, there's obviously people who still collect things, but we just don't. There aren't as many things to collect anymore, right? You can buy comics with like $10 each. So who can afford that?
Yeah.
And then there are people who buy albums now, right? So albums kind of make a comeback, but it's still a niche kind of thing. And I think it's just, it's too easy to kind of, music streaming is a perfect example, and maybe also ebooks in the sense that you can just get it. Yeah. And and you can listen to the songs and then you can let it go and you can listen to something else. You don't want to own it anymore. You're not like when I was a kid and bringing out an album and staring at it. And it was this physical thing. And books there's books are still physical. Most people, or at least half the people are reading by books.
Yeah.
But ebooks, the people are subscribed to Kindle and to Kindle Unlimited. Those ebooks just float in and out of their system and in and out of their brains, and they're not keeping it anymore. It's not the way we used to. And obviously I still do kind of keep all this stuff.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that has changed. I don't know if that's good or bad. I mean, maybe it's good that they don't know about our whole lives as back when we started out with all that crappy stuff we did at the beginning. And
right. Yeah. I wonder if I found these kids online and they were talking about physical media and just the whole, just using the word physical media. And it was interesting because they're all like younger people, like early 20s. And they're like, hey, everybody, like, it's kind of like, have you heard of physical media? Have you heard of DVDs? And it was crazy. These videos had so many views, and it was young people talking about trying to collect DVDs and books and this kind of stuff. So I want to hope that there's going to be a return to physical media, because I don't think it's really gone anywhere, but I do think that there's like a special relationship that you have with something when you live with it and it's on your shelf. It's like just being in the presence of it and having it part of your life on the shelf is such a big deal. It impacts your life. So
absolutely. I just recently, because of course moved several times in my life, and I had the Lord of the Rings, the one that I bought as a kid, right? And I had either loaned out or I couldn't find the first book, right? The Fellowship of the Ring. And so for years I look at this and go, I'll never ever find that again. And then it turned up at my mom and dad's house when we were cleaning up the ranch house, and it's like off in a corner somewhere. It's like, there it is,
Yeah.
and there's this emotional connection to all the time I spent in it. And of course, that would not be the same thing as me looking on my Kindle and oh, there it is, the book I read when I was a kid.
Because those books had a life of their own.
Yeah,
it had a life of its own. It was wrapped around your own life. Like the book is entangled in your own personal life. It's got its own story and where it's been and where it's lived and this kind of thing. You mentioned
how much tea you spilled on it.
Right. Yeah. The dirtier, the better. The more beat up, the better. You mentioned looking back at your old work and maybe cringing or something like that. Do you ever do that? What's your relationship like with your older work? Like when you look back, because a lot of it's really good. So I don't know.
Yeah. I don't cringe very, very much. I don't think there's anything that I'm like ashamed of that I've written. I think my first series, which was Northern Fights, and the first book was Draugr, and it was based on kind of Icelandic stories and myths, and yet set in a modern time. There was something about the first book was just, there's something really frightening about it that I can't quite put my finger on, even though it's a book for kids, and yet there's something like this gut-wrenching in it. And so I'm proud of how it worked out in that sense. And I wouldn't go, oh, it's the most literary book ever or anything like that, because it wasn't intending to be. And so I think probably, when I feel a bit of cringe is if I look back beyond that into my own files, and things that I was writing before that just never quite completed or never really got the little spark of creative life that they needed to become a real book kind of thing.
Right.
Kind of like Pinocchio without any life inside him.
Right.
And so those things I look at and go, okay, yeah, this was me growing up. This was me learning how to be a writer. Anything that got published eventually, I'm pretty happy with for its time. I don't go, oh, that was such a, that was such a silly novel. Why did I write that? It was the right novel at the right time.
What's the fairy godmother thing that makes you want to tap the Pinocchio and take it further into something that you're actually going to finish?
Yeah.
Is there something, what is that? What's that magic sauce that you wait for?
I wish I could answer it in a way that would help other writers, because it really took me, because I was my 7th novel that finally got published. And those first 6,
right? See, that's it.
Started.
Hey, I'm going to interrupt you for 1 second. Okay, so that was your 7th novel that finally got published. So it was the 7th novel that you fully completed.
Yeah.
And so you'd sent off 6 before then, all over the place, looking for agents everywhere.
Yeah.
And so that was years then. Years of work.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It was
a decade.
it was at least a decade of time. It was, I think I started writing seriously when I was like 17, 18 and sending things
Right.
out. And I
Yeah.
wasn't published till I was 30.
Yeah.
And so there
Reality
was a
check.
point. Yeah. Oh yeah. No. And
Yeah.
I mean, some people they write and they're marvelous and they get something out right away and it gets published and all that sort of thing and finds its home.
Right.
But I needed to go through that process, but I also needed to learn in those novels how to write something that people would want to read that was still a good story and had that spark. And it's really hard to explain where I think it's just, it was really practice. I needed to practice and practice and practice until nearly everything I've written since then. There's a few projects that I've kind of given up on or didn't work out, has been published. And it has been, a good story in the sense that people read and go, oh, that entertained me. Yeah. And yet to get to that process, and especially to get past the stage of starting to create something and then getting bored with it.
Oof.
I think that was the hardest thing.
Yeah.
Figuring out when an idea was good enough to take you all the way to the end. And so something like the Hunchback assignments where I thought, oh, what if there was someone like the Hunchback, except he could change his shape and he could become a secret agent and he could, be part of the British Empire. And once I had an idea like that, I go, well, that will keep me going.
Yeah.
But if I only have, the start of the idea, so what if I write about the Hunchback? Then it's like, oh, that's been done. And so it was really this trick of learning when an idea was good enough that it would drive me all the way to the end.
Well, you have to live with these things. You've got to live with this. You've got to live in these worlds and do the grind to get it. I say the word grind in a loving way, but really it's just the grind to get to the finish line. So you better enjoy it, because also too, you don't know, like, you're just doing the part of making the thing. After you're done and you throw it out there into the world, like, it could just be nothing, so you got to live with this thing and just really put everything into it. And then at the end of the day, it might not even be received in the way that you want it to be received. So at least enjoy the time that you spent with these people on their and the terrible things that you put them through. Yeah,
absolutely. You have to believe in the story. You have to, love it enough that you'll finish it. And then when you send it out, you're right. It just might not be received. I mean, Crimson is a good example to me. I really love that fantasy novel. I thought it was such an interesting idea, and I really love all the characters. And yet, it's probably one of my least. It's sold the least amount of all my novels, and this is like my 23rd novel at that point. So you'd think I'd have an audience there, and they just said, "Oh, no, that's not for me." Even though I've just spent the last year and a half working on it, but
it's got your best cover too. Your Crimson is your best cover. It really is.
I do like that cover.
Yeah. But that's a perfect example of, like, you never really know what's going to hit. And maybe this is the thing at the end of the day, like, this is why money, I always think that, like, money is such a dumb motivation. It's the worst motivation you can have for something, because you're only setting yourself up for a letdown if it doesn't make any money. So, have other motivations. Your stuff is geared towards younger people mostly. So is there like speaking of motivations, is there like a takeaway that you want young readers to have when they're reading your stuff?
I like, it's not like a moral or anything like that. I think the real takeaway for me is I want them to have the same experience, and this is probably egotistical in a way, as I had when I was reading The Hobbit for the first time. Yeah. I want them to be able to disappear into it, to believe in these characters, believe in the story, be entertained. They're of course, you can't help not learning stuff because they're interacting, and then getting down and going, wow, that was great. Can I read something else like that? That's all I really want. And that's, that's what I'm aiming for. And I'm aiming it for both the readers, but I'm aiming for myself too, in the sense that when I'm writing, I want to fall into it the same way. I need to do that. Because if it becomes, it is a churn, but if it becomes a chore, it's like you start to lose interest in the story.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the YA thing too helps keep you young, because it's this strange thing where you've got you're dealing with younger audiences, which is a whole can of worms, because how do you personally stay abreast of what their world is like? I guess you've got a child, so that definitely helps. But man, I just think like these are like these alien creatures. Like, having worked on a YA thing, it's like, I mean, I've got a bookshelf full of Dogman and Wings of Fire and Amulet and all this stuff, because I want to know what they're reading. I've got a ton of manga on the go. I'm like, and I love all this stuff. I love it. Totally dig it. I love their world. But it's tough because it's also like, well, they're in the world of TikTok and all of this. And so, yeah, what do you do? I don't know if there's even a way to answer this, but do you find that tricky with the younger audience? Like, just because they feel like they're moving at such a clip that we can't keep up.
See, I think I would find it, you're right. I think I would find it trickier the few times that I've written something that is set in the modern day. Something like Tribes, that's really difficult because they are still living the same life we lived at that age, except for the fact that they have phones and they have all these different distractions. And so for me, and I think a lot of novelists do this, it's not having those distractions in the characters' lives, in a sense of if my fantasy characters are running around with an iPhone all the time, then that would be horrible and not interesting. And so I think what I do as a writer is I just look at what I felt like when I was that age, what I was interested in. And again, it's easier because I'm doing fantasy. I don't have to deal with so much what the lingo is, what kind of things they care about, that sort of thing. I can just go, okay, we've all had we've all grown up, we've all had bullies. We've all had, all these things happen to us. So I can kind of draw on that experience. And again, it's like when you're writing, I'm looking at kind of a mystical reader in my head. That's who I'm thinking of, not the reader who actually exists. And maybe that's why my books don't always hit right. But that's who I'm thinking of. If I start to get stuck into what's going on right now, and they got all, they're all these different things, or these pressures on their lives, that's not, I can't really write about that. I want to write about the things that we have that are familiar and that are the same.
Yeah, you don't want to be like, nothing would date and kill something faster than having immediate contemporary references for like, hey, fellow kids, remember, like, this is the hit song, like the like things like that are immediately like transitory a week later and gone. And, you've, by the time the book even comes out, it's already outdated because you've had these very precise dated things that everybody's moved past already.
Although the hilarious thing is things like Stranger Things come out, and it's like everything from the 80s,
that's
like
different.
D&D and heavy metal are all interesting again, and so I can suddenly talk to my kid about, oh yeah, this was like when I was growing up. Well, whether monsters, at least we didn't find any, but
oh, absolutely.
So those kind of things they come around, but it's really tricky. You can't really. You don't want to date yourself. You're writing too much.
So do you create an archetype then? Do you create an archetype like of your reader? Like
I think over time it's developed, but at the same time, I would say it's probably just me when I was 13 or 8 to 13 is who I'm aiming at.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. No, that's a good thing. There's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you've been doing this for decades. Like you've won too long. Time to pack it up. But your best work is still like 20 years away. So haha.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. So you've won the Governor General Award for Dust.
Yeah.
Which is a huge deal. That's like as big as it gets in Canada. And you also won the TD, what is it? The TD Children's Award, Children's Literary Award. Yeah. Also an extremely big deal. So you're super rooted in the Canadian literary scene, what's that like being a Canadian author? And you've been around long enough. Has it changed? Is there anything different about it? Like, has the scene changed? Has the vibe changed?
Oh, I think,
Take the temperature for me, because I'm tangentially I'm at arm's length from this stuff. So Yeah, you're much
I
more
think it
embedded.
has changed. Yeah, I think it's I think in some ways it was easier when I was starting out. Easier because when I was starting out, so 1997 is when my first book came out,
Stronger.
and like when did the iPhone come out? 2001. So you got like 4 years where there aren't ebooks. There's no iPhone. There's all these things that like the
Yeah,
great distraction. We used to think that movies or TV are kind of our competition, but the real competition for anything creative is what's on our phones. That's taken everybody away.
right.
And so those things weren't there yet. So there felt to me like there were a lot more readers. And there must have been, because my first book comes out and it becomes a bestseller, even though nobody knows who I am. And by bestseller, it sold 5,000 copies, which is all you need to be a bestseller in Canada. But that's a good amount.
Yep.
And it made things feel easy, like, oh, well, now that's not tons of money. But each book after that sold, more. It's up to the point that I think Dust sold like 60,000 copies in Canada, which is really
That's
great.
awesome. Yeah, yeah,
And so even then, that's like 2001. That's feeling like, oh, everything's on ascending.
right.
But I would say that the 20 years after that, everything starts to get chipped away at by phones,
Yeah.
by
Social
there's
media.
just so many more distractions, more things that people are interested in. Schools have changed in the last 5-10 years, as partly because they want to keep the kids, their students, they want to keep them engaged, so they don't always read books now. They'll do reports on movies and that sort of thing. And so everything's being kind of chipped away at, in a sense. And because I mostly would selling into the school market,
Yeah.
you could feel it go up and then just kind of start to go like this for a while. And so I think it is, if somebody's starting out now, I think it's hard industry in two ways. One is it's harder to become published by a publisher because they don't want to take risks anymore. And there don't seem to be huge successes anymore because they're all looking at different niches. That's what they're trying to fill, is the niches. And there's not a huge Hunger Games or Harry Potter kind of thing.
Yeah.
And
And all
then
the
if you go to
resources go into
self-publish,
that. Oh, sorry. Go
yeah,
ahead.
yeah. Well, if you go to self-publishing, well, a lot of the people who are self-publishing, like I've been self-publishing for like 10 years now, I have a basis. I know how to run advertising. So you're competing against me and people who are actually much better than me, who have tons of money and who know how to find the niche and do the advertising and all that. And so it's just, it really is, it's still, I don't want to depress people,
No,
but it's
reality
still
check.
hard.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's hard whatever direction you go.
This is not a
It's
feel-good
hard.
podcast. This is not a
That's right.
motivational thing, guys. This
We're
isn't
here to depress you.
Yeah, this isn't some Gary V stuff. Yeah.
So
No,
like the industry's still there in Canada, and the States. And so there's still a publishing industry.
yeah,
I would say it feels smaller to me in both countries and I mean around the world, in the sense of the traditional part of it feels smaller because I just don't, and I don't have the numbers to back this up, but I feel like there's so much competition from so many different sources now that it's harder to really make a living at it.
yeah. It really is like this whole attention economy thing, and books fail at the quick dopamine, like rapid fire consumption levels that people expect. And one thing that completely makes me insane about this entire period that we're in right now, what it seems to be stuck in at the moment, is this idea that you've got to, you have to have a full-time job. Like, just creating stuff is more than a full-time job. You're putting in these brutal hours. And then on top of it, it's like, oh yeah, and by the way, you need to also have another full-time job being a social media influencer, because you have to have influence to have people buy your stuff. And so then you're sort of like, well, what, but I'm not that guy. Like I'm not, that's not me. I'm not a clown. I hate the sound of my own voice. I don't want to do a podcast. Like, are you serious?
It is a hard thing there.
But then you are, and it's like, oh, maybe it'll be fun. So,
yeah. But that is a hard thing there. And I know that because I've seen writers, over the years go from kind of building their audience and then putting out their book kind of thing, having a specific kind of shtick is the wrong word, because it kind of sounds like I'm putting it down, but something that gets their audience and then they can sell to them. Yeah. And but boy, that's a lot of work. Like I can't remember author's name, but she was doing videos and spending 30 to 40 hours a week making these videos, which were just amazing, wonderful videos about writing and stuff, and had a huge audience. And then she puts out her books, but it's just like, well, which one are you now? Are you a writer, or do you have to be in a chair? You have to be both. And if you're enjoying your life that way, that's great. But most artists like to just sit back and create and not be effusive about it.
Well, and this is the thing: the people that are buying your book, then like this gets into weird territory, because those people that are buying your book as a social media performer clown, are they really there because they love your work? Are they really there to buy your work because they appreciate your work? Or do they just kind of like you as a personality and they want to quote unquote support you? Because that's not that great. That's not something that's, I think, really satisfying. You want people that are buying your work because they genuinely enjoy it and think it has value. And it's like, it doesn't even matter if your name is on it. Like, it's just, are you buying it because it's me, or are you buying it because you genuinely enjoy the work? And
would you buy it and then give it to a friend who knows nothing about the person who created it and they read it and enjoy it? Then it's succeeded, kind of thing.
Yeah.
But ideally it's kind of, you have to jump through both hoops. You have to be really good at promoting, and then you have to write something that's good.
Yeah.
And not everybody can do that either. So
it's crazy.
No, it's a curious time to be an artist. And I every once in a while think back to the past and go, oh, I wish I could be Tolkien and just sit there and smoke a pipe. Well, I don't really want to smoke a pipe, but you just sit there in your office and create your things, and then have your meeting with C.S. Lewis and the other writers once a month, and it's just like, oh, and
just
you're a
talk
professor.
about
this all sounds so simple to me. You're
talk
not up
about
there
the war. Yeah,
that's right.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, it's true, and I mean, it's really this. I think too, it's like it forces you to maintain this sort of treadmill type existence, which as you get older is when you kind of get better usually, but it's also when you have less energy to be on that loop. So it's a really tricky balance. How do you manage that as far as workload and this kind of stuff? Because the burnout thing is real with all of this stuff. It's hard and it's long. And it's, what is it routine? Is it like, what do you do? Are you still writing on a treadmill desk? Is that how you get like
I do. I'm standing on my treadmill desk right now. I still,
Do you actually walk and write at the same time?
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Oh
no, I've been doing that since crazy. 2009. Yeah. Yeah. I think at one point I figured out I'd walked as far as Australia and back almost to Canada. But I stopped keeping track after that. I thought, well,
it'd be so funny if we could zoom out right now and just show your legs, and they're just massive, completely disproportionate.
Right, just two huge legs. That's all I have.
These giant
huge
tree
fingers
trunks
for typing. Yeah. But as far as burnout, I think that I will admit that I'm slowing down as I get older. And that's totally normal.
Yeah.
And I think because I enjoy Dragon Assassin so much, and Hybrax to slightly lesser extent, even though I still have more books to at least write in the series, just because I've been in that world for maybe too long. So that's why I've switched around to another series right now. But it really, and it's been this way since I started, I just had to have a pattern. Like, I get up at 6 every morning and I write for, and I write until about 8, and then, get the kid off to school and all that sort of stuff, and come back and write for another couple hours. And it's really only 4 or 5 hours that I might do in a day. And then the rest of the time, sometimes sitting around, there's just so much paperwork and other things you have to do. And I have to do that every day except Sunday. And that allows me to complete stuff. Because if I don't, I'm as lazy as anyone. Yeah. I just won't do it. So I have to treat it like a job. And then I will get to the end of a project. That it's that, again, the whole churning through it, getting through it. The exciting part is getting the idea. The rest of it is, and horrible is the wrong word. But it's still, it's just a pain, because you want it to be at the end again, where everything's perfect and it's worked out, but everything in between, and especially the book that I'm writing now is like 200,000 words, which is, it's almost 2.5 versions of dust together.
Oh, wow.
So
Yeah.
so that's or maybe 3. Anyway, I don't want to think about that. So that's quite, that's a long kind of process to get to the end of that. And so if I don't have this schedule, I won't
Yeah.
get to the end.
Well, I mean, you are walking, so it's just literally a long hike. It's just
Yeah,
a gigantic
that's
long
right.
hike. It's like you can just measure the length of the project in terms of actual physical distance. And
I actually probably could if I,
you know,
yeah,
this one's going to take me to. I've got to walk to. Just
yeah,
set that as the final destination. Except your
yeah.
scenery is just a screen, which is
It's
sad.
all the same.
You know,
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
just really depressing.
yeah.
Yeah.
It is very
So
sad.
what are you working on right now? What's your is it the iBrax series? And
I just the iBrax series. I've just taken a break from it,
okay.
and I'm working on. This is the craziest title ever. It's going to be a duology. This 200,000 2 books stuck together, and it's called Metaloria and Highway to Hades
Nice.
the
Okay.
subtitle, and it's all inspired by heavy metal and Dungeons and Dragons. And here's the opening. The opening is there's 4 people go to an Iron Maiden concert. They get electrocuted. It's not Iron Maiden's fault, just to be clear. And they get sent to another world. And that other world is basically 1980s heavy metal smushed together with medieval times and magic and elves. And they have to do a Dungeons and Dragons kind of quest to get out of there or to stay because they kind of think it's a cool place.
Well, yeah. Do they each have their own kind of class in a sense? Did you kind of think of them like that a little bit? Like it's playing in that kind of thing?
Yeah, the whole lit RPG thing, or literature role-playing game, literature based on role-playing games. Yeah. Like it can get, if you start getting really deep into the weeds, some of it, they actually describe every little what their strength was, what their intelligence is, how many hits they had, like in the actual text.
Oh, interesting.
And,
okay.
and it's that part is a little bit too over the top for me. So instead, I have one character who can kind of see the Dungeons and Dragons world, and the others are just existing in it and don't realize that there's a gamification around them, just so I can kind of explain there's a game that they're playing and he can see it, but they can't. So it kind of makes it a bit more, a better way of explaining it to audience who don't necessarily like or know Dungeons and Dragons. For them, it's just a fantasy novel. But if you like Dungeons and Dragons, you go, oh, it's a fantasy novel with Dungeons and Dragons. I should say that's trademarked with my own game, within it.
Right, without having to get super granular into the weeds of the mechanics of the game itself. That they're exactly.
Yeah, just enough that people go, oh, okay, that's kind of interesting, as opposed to, oh, wow, this is really nerding out.
Yeah, right on. Well, very cool. Yeah. Well, thank you for coming. Thank you for joining me on the first Art Pod. You're the first guest, and you were great.
Well, thank you. Well, you were great too. I really enjoyed it.
This episode is brought to you by the things that we make. She's an assassin. He's a dragoner. Together they'll take on an empire. Take a ride on a non-stop way adventure. Dragon Assassin, a thrilling fantasy series from award-winning author Arthur Slade. Links in show notes.
Silverwing. Shade is a young silverwing bat, the runt of his colony, but he's determined to prove himself on the long, dangerous winter migration to Hibernaculum, millions of wingbeats to the south. During a fierce storm, he loses the others and soon faces the most incredible journey of his young life. Perfect for young readers who are into Amulet, Bone, Wings of Fire, or graduating from Dogman. Silverwing is the first book in this best-selling series and is available at bookstores everywhere, or you can find a link in the show notes.
Silverwing.